Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Cass Business School. I'm Stephen Haberman, Dean of Cass, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming back the Contrarian lecture to the Business School. And I'm delighted to see Michael Woodford, where is Michael? Yes, I can see you in the middle there, who won the Contrarian Prize last year and gave us a really stimulating lecture around about 12 months ago in this room. This year's winner, Clive Stafford Smith, holds an honorary degree from City University, so we're really delighted to...
I recommend honorary degrees.
Yeah. It's the hardest thing he ever did. As you know, Clive's the founder and director of the human rights organisation Reprieve, and he'll be speaking in a moment about the long process of untangling injustice. Ali Mirage, who is the founder of the prize, will be saying a few words about Clive. But I have 30 seconds to say a few words about Cass, for those of you who are here for the first time. And I see from the audience, many of you are here for the first time. So as you can see, Cass is a leading international business school. We're the only one based in the City of London. And the people who measure these things tell me that we are in the top 4 business schools in the UK and the top 18, to be absolutely precise, the top 18 in Europe. And we've reached these dizzy heights over the last 10 years through improving everything that we do. Really focusing on quality of the staff, but quality of the students and quality of what goes on between the staff and the students in classrooms like this. We were among the first business schools in the UK to respond to the financial crisis by reviewing everything in our curriculum connected to ethics, and we strengthened the ethical content of every one of our degrees. All of our faculty went on ethical training, all of our professional staff went on ethical training. We regard this as a really important thing for the school to do. And talking about CSR, we have one of the most widely respected management programs for colleagues working in the voluntary sector. And we've worked with several recent Lord Mayors on initiatives to rebuild trust in the city, and most recently on Fiona Wolf's charity leadership program. I could speak for hours about the business school, but you'll be relieved to hear I'm not going to. You're not here to hear me tell you about the business school. I'm just going to say a few words about Ali, but I'm required to make 2 housekeeping announcements. The first is, what it says in my notes is I have to tell you to switch off your mobile phones, but I understand there's this thing called tweeting, and if you switch off your mobile phone, you won't be able to do that. So if you could just make sure they're silent. And I encourage you to tweet and tell everyone how wonderful the forthcoming lecture, and indeed the lecture is as it's being delivered. The second thing is, if there is a continuous alarm, it means we're in trouble and you have to leave the building, the room by the doors at the back, and go up the stairs. Please don't use the lifts. There's no fire drill this evening. So, tonight's lecture, to be delivered by Clive. Clive is going to be introduced by Ali. After the lecture, or indeed perhaps during the lecture, there's going to be a Q&A. But after the lecture, we're going to be outside in the reception. There'll be an opportunity to speak to Clive, and indeed he will sign copies of his book. So I'm going to hand over to Ali and just say a few words about Ali, founder of the Contrarian Prize, a friend of Cass, an independent thinker, commentator, DJ, banker, politician, polymath. Over to you, Ali. You will tell us about the prize and introduce tonight's winner. Thank you very much.
I forgot to tell Ali this, and it's very, very unfair to do this, but if he says anything sincere about me, I want you to heckle. So I shall tell you, whatever, we'll see how he does, but anyway.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for your very generous words. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm delighted to see so many of you here this evening, and I must begin by thanking the Dean for his hospitality in hosting us in this absolutely fabulous setting, and for his generosity in sponsoring the mingling session that will take place afterwards. It's truly wonderful to be here for the second year. I must also thank Mariam Marinescu, who has worked tirelessly in putting the event together, and Sophie Cubbin for promoting it. Both have exhibited consummate professionalism. I also would like to say that you should feel free to tweet during the lecture referencing @Contrarian Prize using the hashtag #CPrize. British politics is broken. Those in any doubt should just look at the result in the recent Clacton by-election when UKIP secured its first parliamentarian. I started out in British politics in 1998 at the age of 23 as a local councillor before fighting 2 parliamentary elections. And I used to go around on the doorsteps in these various constituencies, and people used to say to me, quite often actually, "There's no point voting for you, you're all the same." And that charge is not without merit. Peter Oborne, in his seminal work, The Triumph of the Political Class, has talked about the emergence in the last 20 years of a coterie of political insiders who have more in common with one another than they do with those they govern. If you actually look at the leaders of the 3 established political parties, all are career politicians. And nowadays, politics is regarded very much as a vocation. The corollary of this is that those who choose to enter it have every desire or every motivation to toe the party line, to confer preferment to advance their career. Too often, politics and decisions seem to be driven by expediency, what will fly with the focus groups, rather than on principle and belief. I think leadership is about shaping opinion, not simply pandering to it. You also see the kind of independent-minded MPs that A.J.P. Taylor lauds in his book, Troublemakers, Dissent in Foreign Policy, 1792 to 1939. Those kind of independent-minded MPs have disappeared. You know, people say that it's easy to be independent-minded when you're protected by the cloak of personal wealth, but that's a fallacy. The people who actually stand up and speak out for what they believe are not driven by the size of their wallets. It is a question of mindset. Just take John Ball, the priest who in 1381 led the Peasants' Revolt and was hung, drawn and quartered for doing so, or Tom Paine, the revolutionary philosopher and thinker who was smeared by the British political establishment for speaking out, or latterly, Robin Cook. These were not men of means, they were men of ideas. I think that nowadays what we see is all too often that the natural right of the people who govern us is that ipso facto they should be in power. But it's not just politics that the British public is exasperated with. We've had the phone hacking scandal, the Hillsborough cover-up, malfeasance in the financial sector, and now a child abuse inquiry that is yet to get off the ground because of the twice botched attempt to appoint a chair. I believe that the British public want to see leaders of conviction. That is why I decided to found the Contrarian Prize. Nominees have to be active in British public life. They could be politicians, activists, journalists, lawyers, and they have to exhibit 4 criteria. And you nominate them, the public nominate them via the website. The 4 criteria are independence of thought, courage and conviction in their actions, they should have made a sacrifice, and they should have introduced new ideas into the public realm. There are no large foundations or corporates behind this prize. I fund the costs myself personally, along with a handful of private individuals. I would suggest you nominate someone by visiting contrarianprize.com, and please spread the word. You've got flyers on your desks. I convened the Contrarian Prize lecture with the help of and support of Cas Business School because I wanted to give the winner of the Contrarian Prize a platform to speak about the issues and the ideas and things that are important to them, and also to engage with the public in a public debate. But it is not just about intellectual lectures. Whilst other international prizes may host white tie concerts in Oslo, the Contrarian Prize will be hosting the Contrarian Prize in the Mix dance party in Shoreditch. I'm pleased to say for the second year I'll be joined again on the turntables on the 3rd of December by Greg Sawyer from Defected Records and Nick Stevenson from Mixmag. Please do come and join us. The details are on the website. It'll be great fun, as it was last year. Now, to the main business of the evening. The 2014 Contrarian Prize winner, the human rights lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith. He's an extraordinary individual.
I think we're getting very close to sincere already.
He's an extraordinary individual. I can feel myself clamming up. He's always consistently throughout his career fought against injustice. In fact, he founded his own charity, Reprieve, to help his work combating the death penalty. Now, Clive has represented over 300 individuals on death row in the US and prevailed in all but 6 cases. He's also taken 5 cases to the Supreme Court and won all of them. Now, Clive, I think it's fair to say, was a contrarian since he was a teenager. He was educated at Radley College and offered a place at Cambridge. And then he could have had a conventional path, which would have brought him riches and status, but he said no. He turned down his place at Britain's top university to go to the States to learn about the American justice system. He later eschewed a career in the corporate legal world to go and work for next to nothing on death row, because you don't get any legal aid for appeals against the death penalty. And Clive, I think it's fair to say, is not simply a contrarian because he combats injustice, laudable though that may be. No. It is where and the manner in which he does it. Taking on the US justice system head on and facing public opprobrium in many states across America takes grit, determination, courage, and self-belief. Now, many years ago, Clive started working on the case of Chris Maharaj, a British businessman who was convicted of the double murder of a business associate and his son in a Florida hotel room. Now, Clive chronicles this in his book, Injustice, in some detail, including the fact that the first trial judge was bribed and the fact that highly questionable pieces of evidence were presented as part of the case. It beggars belief that the guy was ever convicted. And basically, I just wanted to say that thank heavens we have people like Clive. I could think of no one better to represent the values of the prize that we're looking to espouse. So, ladies and gentlemen, Clive Stafford Smith.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, the people who are standing at the back, are there any spare seats? Can you put your hand up and someone can come and have this one? I hate to have you. There are 2 here. Come and sit down, for goodness sake. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pass around these. The doors are now locked. If you don't sign up to help Reprieve, you get shot as you go out. If, on the other hand, you do sign up to help Reprieve, we'll exploit you for the rest of your damn lives. So I want to thank the Cass people because they named this place after me. I'm very impressed. My parents wanted to call me Adrian Stafford Smith until my father wanted to do that, until my mother noticed that the initials, while entirely appropriate, were not ones you wanted to go through life with. So they tacked on Clive at the beginning, giving me the initials Cass. And I'm really, really grateful to you people for naming an entire school after me. And that's great. The world is solipsistic. It's all about me, obviously. And I just want to say before I go into what is not a lecture, it's a rant that will be periodically interrupted by me trying gratuitously to embarrass you. That business, you may not think that we can exploit you at Reprieve, but I just want to give you one example. In the death penalty, we have stopped executions in the United States in all but 3 states today based on one simple fact, which is the bastards want to get drugs to execute people, and we got to the pharmaceutical companies and we've stopped them. Because if you have the choice of persuading the US Supreme Court of something, and let's face it, they're a bunch of decrepit old morons, and lest I be accused of contempt of court, let me just say I have nothing but contempt for that lot. But I plead guilty. But you have a choice of persuading them that the death penalty is a bad thing, or you have a choice of persuading pharmaceutical companies that they don't want their drugs to be used to execute people. And we from here in London have had so much fun maneuvering that process. So now they've all run out of drugs. And they were trying to kill one of my old clients from Louisiana a while back, and they didn't know that we knew that they didn't have any drugs to kill him. And so they were desperate that we'd get a stay because they would look so stupid if they'd ended up in the execution chamber and had to admit they didn't have any drugs. And there are so many different ways that you can do justice, and so you people, those of you who go to Cass Business School, will exploit you as well. Okay, now, what I want to do, and I'll just give you fair warning, I had one of my energetic staff, if you come and work with Reprieve, what we do is we send you out to buy little dolls when I want to have an exhibit for a talk like this. I just want to warn you that this is all about judgment. It's all about how we judge people, but it's really all about me judging you, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that, but no, I just want to make you thoroughly paranoid, because what I want you to think about tonight is that when we judge people, actually the biggest reflection of anything there is on ourselves. And I want to start by giving you a little, it's just a little mind game. It's a real case. It's two people I represented years and years ago in a case in the state of Louisiana. And I'm going to tell you the one single fact that you need to know, and then I want you to tell me what happened, okay? And you've got to think about it. Don't give me any bullshit like questions. I want your response, your emotional response to what really happened. And it's this: 6-day-old baby, right, in the freezer, in the house of these two people, dead. What happened? My two clients are the mum and dad, and they're facing execution for capital murder. Now, I want you to think, what do you think really happened to this 6-day-old baby that was dead in the freezer, right? Now, the problem for people in the front row who get those nice reserved seats is I get to pick on them first. But all of you, I just want you to hold in your mind what your first reaction was. What was it? What was it that caused that child's death that these two people are now on trial for their life on? So you, sir, Marius, what do you think happened? I'm sorry about this. It's really bad to sit in the front row. It really is. Yeah.
The child died a natural death and they are not preserving it.
Okay, cryogenics, they're going to sort of get them up later. That's your guess? Okay. How about you, ma'am?
I don't know.
You've got to do something.
I wouldn't have absolutely no opinion on what happened.
I'm sorry you have to, because I'm the judge, and if you don't, I hold you. You are in contempt of court if you don't reach a thing. We'll get to you, ma'am. If there's any, I very rarely ask people this, but if there's anyone who I have asked before, for goodness sake, don't say. Well, right. What do you say?
Well, I think they probably were watching Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Right. And what happened? What happened in Psycho?
Well, I mean, it would have to be some sort of a Hitchcock, twist to this whole kind of thing.
But what do you think they did with this child? Or did the child commit suicide?
They probably did it.
Sorry?
The babysitter probably did it.
The babysitter did it. Okay, so the babysitter gets executed. Any other guess? You're in the front row. What about you, ma'am?
So I'm thinking, freezer doors open, baby goes in.
6 days. How many kids do you have? I'm sorry, you look young, ma'am. But it's 6 days old. When Right. So the baby crawls in, commits gratuitous suicide at age 6 days. Okay. Sorry?
Why don't you ask?
I know what happened. They don't know, but I do know. What are you going to say, ma'am?
I wasn't sure. Maybe if it had a fever, they were trying to
Cool it down a bit. And you as the judge, you have two parents who wanted to cool the fever down, who put it in the freezer and it died. What do you do as the judge? Come on, you've got to sentence them. What do you do?
manslaughter, I guess.
Manslaughter, 20 years? Well, 20 years is the minimum in most American states for manslaughter, but yeah.
No, I mean,
Okay.
trying to help and they didn't know what to do.
Right, okay. Anyone else got a view you would like to offer? You're scratching your head. You should never do that. It's like, I grew up in Newmarket, and we used to go to the horse sales. And if you pick your nose, you just bought a stallion for £200,000. So since you scratched your head, sir, you now have to tell me what happened to this baby.
I'm just thinking the obvious, that the baby was killed and put in the freezer as part of
So you're the judge, and you're faced with mum and dad. What do you do to them?
sentences of death.
Death. All right, cool. You, sir, are a true Louisianan. Yeah.
The baby, can you get to IQ
Yeah. Well, you can, but you're not allowed to because I'm not giving you that option. Anyway, look, I asked you this question, and I normally like, I'm going to write a book about this case at some point because it's great fun to just toy with people. I could drip facts to you. So, for example, when the cops arrive on the scene, the mother says, I must have killed my child. So, do you think, oh my God, did mum do it? Then, or I could tell you, for example, that the mother had a stalking boyfriend who was spotted in the neighborhood who had been after her for a while. There were pry marks on the back of the trailer home. Do you think it was the boyfriend? Or I could tell you that the husband was a lunatic who liked Dungeons and Dragons and had knives all over the house and had lots of guns and he was a nutter. And I could drip those facts out to you, and it's quite fun doing it actually. I've done it with American audiences, and it's so much fun because they won't. Normally, I'm American, right? And most of us Americans would kill you as soon as look at you. But people go back and forth about what really happened. Now I'm going to tell you what really happened. And I know what really happened, and the mum and dad don't know. The father had a long history of sleepwalking. And the father sleptwalked and put that baby in the freezer. And I say that with absolute certainty because we eliminated everything else. But not many of you would ever have come up with that. Maybe someone would. I mean, was there anyone here who thought, oh, sleepwalking? Put your hand up if you thought sleepwalking. Really, you can. I mean, I've got to say that was one of the first things that occurred to me. Because there's got to be a reason. I've got a little child. You don't, as a parent, put your child in the freezer, except for her. And no, sorry, you didn't, did you? You had the child crawling in at 6 days. But that's what happened. That's what really happened. Now, how many people think, oh, that's Clive bullshit again? I wouldn't believe that. If you were on the jury and I presented that to you, who here would believe it? And who here would not believe it? And you have to vote one way. You can't not vote. You're cheating. The reason I ask that question is this, because actually it's a reflection. The way we respond to that issue is about us. It's not about what happened to this baby. It's about our response to bizarre things. And bizarre things happen all the time, of course. When you think the odds of that happening are 1 in a million, well, of course, if you're in a country with 300 million people, that sort of thing's going to happen all the time. But the problem is that when it happens, no one will believe you. I had this most fantastic expert on the case who was a sleepwalking expert who told me about this case he had in Minneapolis, where the guy got up, sleptwalked to his car, drove his car across town while asleep, went to his parents-in-law's house, murdered his mother-in-law, stabbing her lots of times, tried to murder his father-in-law, failed narrowly to kill him, got back in the car, blood all over him, went back home and went back to bed. The only reason he was not convicted of murder was because the father-in-law survived and said the guy was asleep. I couldn't do anything to wake him up. And, these are bizarre, bizarre things. And when I was representing these people, I was going around talking to people like her, and just because I was interested and I wanted to see who's going to buy this stuff. This is the truth, but who's going to buy it? And the truth is, it happens all the time. I talk to all these people who said, when I was really, really tired, and those of you who've had kids like Em and I had Wilf, my wife had postnatal psychosis, and I had postnatal God knows what, and the sleep deprivation you have under those circumstances is phenomenal. And I'd met several people who told me stories about how they opened the fridge door, took the water out, put the baby in, and shut the door again. And it was just interesting, and yet not one of them obviously ever reported it, because if you did report that, child services would pop round and you'd lose your child. And things like this happen all the time. And the death penalty cases I do over the years happen all the time, the most bizarre things that people would never believe. And we acquitted both of those people, but not by we did tell the truth. We told the truth about what really happened. No one believed that. They all believed this other bullshit about the boyfriend and all the rest of it. But that's really not what happened. And the jurors would never, ever believe that something like that happened. And that's about us, right? That's about the way we judge people. Now, let's move on to the case of Chris Maharaj, which I warn you, frankly, is going to be another psychological test of you lot. No, it's great. I want to make a point here, and I want to make a point about why you should give up whatever you're doing and just come and work with Reprieve for the rest of your damn lives. And so here we go. I spent the last week in Miami representing Chris at a really bloody hearing where the prosecutors were desperate to keep this poor guy in prison. He's 75 years old, he's patently innocent, and they really want to keep him in prison. And we presented all this stuff about how he was innocent and so forth. And, you know, we had a very nice judge who I think will do the right thing in due course. Although that won't get Chris out, of course. It'll get him a new trial, and at 75, who knows what will happen, whether he'll survive a new trial. So that's what I spent my last week doing. And, you know, before that, I wrote this endless book, which I advise you to steal from outside. You should not pay good money for it. But now, what I want to do is I want to try the case to you. You're the jury, right? And at the end of the trial, you're going to have to vote guilty or not guilty. And if you don't vote either way, I'm going to keep very close eyes on particularly you two who didn't vote last time, and I know you're cheating. So if you don't vote one way or the other, you get held in contempt, and God knows what Ali does to you. I don't know. He's my enforcer. But I'm going to give you the prosecution case and everything that was done at trial, and you've got to vote one way or the other, right? And remember, you have to vote guilty beyond a reasonable doubt or not guilty. And if you vote not guilty, you've got to explain yourself. This was the case. Chris Maharaj was involved in a horrible, horrible public battle with these two people, Derek and Dwayne Moo Young. Derek was the father, Dwayne was the son. And Derek, they'd been in the newspapers telling awful things about each other. Chris insisted they'd stolen $441,000 from him. The Moo Youngs insisted that Chris was a crook and had stolen it from them, and so forth. So a big, very public argument, very ugly, which was the motive, right? And so the prosecution said the motive for this was Chris lured them into the DuPont Plaza Hotel, room 1215, and killed them there. Now, the rest of the evidence against him involved basically this. First, when arrested, Chris said that he'd never been in room 1215, right? And his fingerprints were all over the place. So he's clearly lying. So he's got something he's trying to hide, that his fingerprints are in the room, and he's lying about it, saying that he was never in the room. Second, when asked if he ever owned a 9mm pistol, Chris says he never owned one. The murder weapon was a 9mm pistol. And Chris lied, apparently, because there was a police officer who had sold him a 9mm pistol. So he's definitely lying about that and covering up the fact that he had a gun that matched the murder weapon, right? Third, a witness called Tino Geddes comes in and testifies that actually Chris had sort of done a few dry runs. He had tried to kill the Moo Youngs on 4 separate occasions, including a time when he had gone to the DuPont Plaza Hotel and he had been in suite 406, and he had told this guy Tino Geddes about how he was going to lure them in there, and he was going to burst in from the other room and shoot them because he hated their guts. Then there was a witness called Neville Butler who testified that he was there. He was in room 1215. He witnessed the murders. He witnessed the argument between Chris Maharaj and the Moo Youngs. And he witnessed Chris shooting them. And just to cap it off, the prosecution said that he'd taken a polygraph test, a lie detector test, and passed. And then Tino Geddes also said that Chris had tried to falsify an alibi. So Chris had tried to get a number of people to give him an alibi, saying he was somewhere else at the time of the crime. He wasn't somewhere else at the time of the crime. And so Tino had refused to do that. And Chris had a ticket to leave the country that evening to go to Trinidad to get away from Miami at the time that the police arrested him, right? That was the evidence put on by the prosecution. They turn to the defense. The defense says the defense rests. There's no witnesses put on, no alibi witness. Chris Maharaj doesn't take the stand, anything like that. So that's the sum total of the evidence that you hear. You've also got the fingerprint expert who says his fingerprints are all over the room. Okay, you are now the jury. The closing arguments have been completed, and you've got to vote guilty or not guilty. So my eyes are on you two. Who votes guilty?
On the evidence evidence you presented,
Well, you've got
to
to
vote guilty.
stick your hand up then. Who votes guilty? Chris didn't testify, no.
Plead not guilty.
He said he was not guilty, but he didn't testify or anything. Everyone pleads not guilty, you don't go to trial. Put your hands way up if you're if you're saying guilty as the jury. You bastard.
I've read the book.
Okay, and now I just want to look around so I make sure I see you all. Now, who votes not guilty? All right, yeah, you know better than to do that. And old Woodford over there. Now, who's sitting next to some sneaky little bastard who didn't vote? No. You didn't vote. You didn't vote. You are in contempt, sir. Why did you not vote?
Keeping my powder dry, I'm not going to make a decision until I've got more information.
You can't do that, I'm afraid. You've got to go one way or the other. Interesting. What do you reckon? I think that was about an 80% conviction rate, right? And 20% who wasn't. Because you poor people are in the front row, I'm going to pick on you. How on earth could you vote not guilty?
Because I don't believe it beyond a reasonable.
So what? There's all these very reasonable people out here who have no reasonable doubt. What's your reasonable doubt?
Because the knowledge I have of the death penalty as it is,
Mm-hmm.
so many ridiculous problems with it.
Well, we haven't got to sentencing him. There's a whole separate trial on whether he gets life or death. The issue is whether you're going to convict him.
I'm not 100% sure.
So what's the doubt? Where's your doubt? By the way, you're quite right. These other people, I just want to help you out. You know, these other people are insane. Yeah. So what's your reasonable doubt then?
My reason. Oh,
Oh dear. Okay. Sorry? You can pass it over to her. Yeah, all right. What's your reasonable doubt?
Polygraphic tests aren't reliable. You can lie on them.
Yeah, so you can lie on a polygraph. I'll tell you how to do it in a minute. Would you like me to tell you how to do it? Yeah. This is good, yeah. I was spending a summer with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department when I was 19, and with cops like that, you really don't need criminals. And Sergeant Pork gave me a polygraph and told me how to beat it. And I should say first, I'm an awfully bad liar. I'm really bad at it. But he told me, what you do when you're doing a polygraph, right, is they sit you in a chair, and you're sort of strapped in, and they put these little things on you that test your emotional responses. And so to begin with, they want to set your base level, and then they ask you the real questions, and they see if your emotional responses go off the scale. So what Sergeant Pork told me to do is, when they set the base level questions, which they do with innocuous things like, is your birthday July the 9th? Is your mother's name Jean? And you say yes to that stuff. That's how they set your base level. And he said, when they ask those questions, you think the most erotic sexual thoughts you can possibly think. And that sets your base level somewhere way up here. And you know, it's all very easily said, but it's quite hard to do when you're talking about your mother. But I did that. And then when they ask you the tough questions about whether you're guilty of something or not, you just think the same stuff and answer at random. And I did that, and it was really easy. I beat the test. So that's just some free legal advice. So your reasonable doubt is that the guy passed a polygraph test and you don't necessarily believe it.
Yeah.
You got to have something other than that.
There's no defence for him. Like,
The fact that he has no defense means you'd vote not guilty. I love that as a defense lawyer. Yeah.
There's not an alternative situation proposed, and you would think that his legal abilities, even if they thought he would do it, his solicitors, they would say he might have been crazy or whatever defence they might have.
So his defense lawyer seems a bit inept to you.
Yeah.
His defense lawyer, by the way, is now a judge. I got nearly held in contempt for saying the guy was hopeless, because he's now a judge, and they said that was contempt of court. Oh, fuck that. Anyway, whatever. Okay, who else voted not guilty? Someone who voted, yeah, sir, why did you vote not guilty?
The witnesses sounded way too convenient
Uh-huh, right,
to the point of not believable.
right, good.
Too much of
I'll
it.
have you on my jury, mate, yeah. Who else? Yeah, what about you?
It all seems too circumstantial, too convenient, I feel, the gentleman said.
Although you have an eyewitness who's right there in the room.
Yes, reliable.
Ah, good question. Ma'am in the back.
Well, it was too brief. I mean, your recapping of the trial in 6 minutes, I think, is
I'm sorry, you have to buy the goddamn book. It goes on for pages and pages.
guilty or not guilty, but the 6-minute recap.
Yeah, fair enough. But look, this is what intrigues me about this, right? And I really don't mean to say this judgmentally. I told you he was innocent at the beginning, didn't I? And I mean, he told you he was innocent. I spent the last 21 years proving he's innocent, and you voted guilty. How could you do that? Now, this is what's so interesting to me, because, you know, that's not rare. That's exactly the way we all behave. And we behave that way not just when we're doing this jury trial business. We behave that way when we're judging other people, like I've just rudely judged all of you. No, I don't mean that. Of course I don't mean that. But we do that. When we say guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, we're crazy. We don't have a standard that's nearly high enough. You know, we convict people on the basis of things that are just ridiculously fallible. And so let me tell you what really happened, and then you'll begin to see what this is all about. But what I want you to think about in this is the bizarre things that happen around the world. And before we go sending people to prison, or God forbid, to death row, whether we shouldn't be thinking about the things that really might have happened before we go convicting people. First, let's take the polygraph test. Of course you're right. Chris passed a polygraph test. Chris Maharaj passed a polygraph test saying he was innocent, because he is innocent. Actually, I discover, you know, one of the great things about American law, who's American here? I'm sorry, our country is totally, totally insane. Although I should just, can we just bond for a minute, you and me? Because I just want to point out from my Guantanamo Bay work that the three of us, were there just three or were there any other Americans? Four. Five of us. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. We are the only human beings in this room. These other people are just foreigners. And you know, when aliens, you know, I actually had a green card for a long time in America, which is sort of typical when you're an alien, before I got an American passport. But, you know, in Guantanamo Bay, you and I have rights if we went there. These people don't have any. And when we were first litigating the Guantanamo stuff, I discovered that the American environmental laws apply in Guantanamo Bay. So if you're an iguana, you have legal rights, whereas if you're a damn foreigner, you don't. And paradoxically, if I were to kick an iguana as an American citizen in Guantanamo Bay, $10,000 fine, 10 years in prison. If I kick you, sir, nothing. Absolutely fine. And when we were in the US Supreme Court in Rasul versus Bush, which I'm glad to say we won, we argued that you people should have equal rights with iguanas, because that would be a way, way higher than what George Bush was going to do for you. Anyway, that's by the by. But what I really meant to say about us Americans is we have the most shit legal system in the entire world, in many ways. And in many ways it's actually very good, but in many ways it's crazy. And one way it's crazy is that when you're facing the death penalty in most American states, you have the right to access to the prosecutor's file and the case against you only after you've been convicted. Now that's a little crazy. And, you know, when I first got involved in Chris's case, which I got involved in because the British government asked me to, and here we are 21 years later, and they've done nothing to help defray. We're now, reprieve is over £200,000 in the hole on that case, notwithstanding some very generous people, some of whom are in this room, who have helped support it. And the British government's done nothing for that, because as Ali said, when you're on death row in America, you have no constitutional right to counsel. You're meant to represent yourself. So here we are, and I get to look at Chris's police file when I get involved in the case when he's on death row. The first thing I find is their star witness failed the polygraph test. He couldn't even beat the lie detector. So the only eyewitness lied. And the only, well, I mean, he clearly lied, whether it's the polygraph or not. But then I look in they presented evidence at trial that the Mu Young's father and son his father was a disabled businessman making less than $24,000 a year. The son didn't have any job. They were just really quite hard up. I find their briefcase that was never revealed to the defense. And their briefcase has in it that Derek and Dwayne Mu Young were offering first to buy a bank in Panama for $600 million. First. Second, they were offering loans to various Caribbean governments totaling $5 billion in 1986. And you people at the Cass Business School will know that the richest person in the world in 1986 was?
Well, it's not me.
No, no, it definitely wasn't you. It was Adnan Khashoggi, who was worth $5.6 billion. Theoretically, he actually wasn't the richest person. The richest person was from somewhere else. Then they also had in their briefcase, they had apparently $134 million worth of gems that they were using and various other things like that. Now, what does that make you think about the Mu Youngs? Sorry?
Involved in criminal enterprise.
Yeah. What type of criminal enterprise? Sorry? Fraud? Drugs? Oh, yeah, I like you. You'd be on my jury. Yeah, of course it's drugs. It's Miami. It's 1986, right? No, seriously, Miami Vice was made all about that. And, fascinatingly enough, in that decade, I had a cop on the stand the other day, and he said in the homicide department of Miami, there were 38 cops, right? In one incident, in 1 year, 16 of them were arrested for narcotics, right? Almost 50% of the entire homicide department. And at the time, the people who were laundering money, which country do you think these money launderers were coming from? Anyone? It's actually much richer than Adnan Khashoggi. Sorry?
Colombia.
Of course, Colombia. Now, do you know the amount of money, I love this factoid, the amount of money the Colombians had to launder each year to get their drug money back to Colombia, if it's in dollar bills, would have weighed more than the population of Washington, D.C. Now, that to me, and I don't know about you, ma'am, speaking as an American, do you think the population of Washington, D.C. is svelte or not? No, they're quite a heavy lot, right? So, we have an enormous amount of money going around in Miami at the time. You have an amazing number of corrupt cops. And I was asking one of the cops the other day, what do you people mean when you use the word testify? And he chuckled and he said, oh, that's what we used to say when we'd go to court and lie. I thought that was quite interesting, just as a sort of fact as well. So we're in Miami. We've got all this narcotic stuff going on. More than 50% of the murders each year in Miami at the time were clearly narcotics related. Now, another little fact, and then you've got the Mu Youngs with these billions of dollars. There was one room that was occupied on the 12th floor, apart from room 1215 where the murder happened, and that one room was occupied by a guy called Jaime Vallejo Mejia. Now, what country do you think he was from?
Mexico.
Colombia. He was from Pereira, Colombia. And, Pereira is right between Medellin and Cali. And, one of the things I found out when I was trying to work out where the hell Pereira was I Googled it, and I discovered that it's twinned with Miami. Now, what cocaine were those people snorting when they voted to twin Miami with Pereira? Anyway, so this guy's across the hall from the murder scene. No one thought to talk to him and ask him if maybe he had anything to do with drugs. Well, we discovered later that he was actually being investigated and was under indictment at the time of trial for taking $40 million in cash to Switzerland. Where do you think the $40 million in cash came from? Yeah, drugs, all right. It was going to Colombia. So, you begin to get this stuff that's coming out when I start looking into the case. And we discover a whole bunch of other stuff. First, we discover that Tino Geddes, you remember the chap who said that he had this dry run where Chris was going to burst through the door between Suite 404 and Suite 406. Well, I went to the DuPont Plaza Hotel. I was just curious. And I went to room 404 and 406, and there wasn't a door between the two. And then we start looking into old Tino Geddes, and it turns out he was arrested. He originally said that Chris had an alibi, and then he was arrested for smuggling drugs and for smuggling guns into Jamaica, facing life in prison. And that was when he called up the prosecution and said he'd like to change his testimony. And he was a member, it turns out, of the Jamaican Shower Posse, which was their big drug cartel that was working with the Colombians. And that's when he came in and testified all this stuff for the prosecution. This is an interesting thing to me. If I want a witness to say something, I can go talk to him and I can say it's a moral and righteous thing to do. If I'm a prosecutor, I can go talk to him and say, if you say that, I get to forgive you a life sentence. Now, let me ask you two, as you're in the second row, do you know each other? Do you know each other? Yes. Okay. You, sir, if you're facing life in prison and I tell you that you're either going to prison for the rest of your life, or if you say she's a drug dealer, you can get off without anything, what do you do?
Go to prison for the rest of my life.
Oh, fuck off. You don't. You'd do your own granny, wouldn't you? We know that. No, it's an amazing power, isn't it? It's an incredible power that the government has, that they can forgive you life in prison or even the death penalty. Neville Butler, who was patently, according to his own testimony, involved in this murder, was forgiven everything, didn't spend a single day in jail, the guy who failed the lie detector test. And yet, I want to get people to talk. I can't do that. So, you know, Tino Geddes changed his story because he was forgiven a life sentence. Two of them, he just knows that things are... Just gave you £10? God, she's bribing witnesses. It's stunning. I don't do that. I'm a fine, upstanding, ethical lawyer. I don't bribe my witnesses. Anyway, so Tino Geddes changed his story because he was facing life in prison. Neville Butler had failed his lie detector test and was lying through his teeth. The prosecution covered up all this evidence about the Moo Youngs. We had a hearing on... Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why do you, just because somebody fails a lie detector test that you've already discredited, do you draw a conclusion?
No, I don't from that. I draw a conclusion because chapter 4 of the book that you're going to steal from outside goes through everything else we know about him. We got him on 6 different cases of perjury and different cases that he was involved in, so on and so forth. There's a lot more to it. But the bottom line is, you know, they're already pretty tenuous, but we haven't even begun to investigate what really happened, right? But let's just pause now, because the evidence I've just thrown out to you, basically what we knew in 1997. How many people now vote guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Really? There must be some of you. You Americans, surely. No. Look, you know, we put that evidence on in 1997 and lost because the court said, well, you know, he still seems pretty guilty to me. So Chris, who by then had been on death row for many, many years, we won the death penalty, and we won it partly, you know, Ali mentioned that the first judge in the case was a guy called Howard Gross. Howie the Mouse was his nickname because he apparently had rodent features, and he had a swimming pool that was in the shape of a mouse. Well, Howie the Mouse had paid for his swimming pool by bribery and corruption, and on day 3 of Chris's trial, this is the judge sitting on his trial, that morning he's tape recorded taking, paradoxically, money from a Colombian drug cartel member who actually wasn't, who was actually a Florida law enforcement agent. And so he's arrested on day 3 of the trial. He's just heard a bunch of witnesses. He's taken away in handcuffs. So do you think they stopped the trial? No. They just substitute another judge in. And you've got to remember, in Florida, it's the judge who decides whether you get life or death. So they carry on with the trial with this guy called Harold Solomon, who is equally well named. The wise Judge Solomon, I found in the prosecutor's file that he had got together secretly with the prosecutors before he heard the evidence at the penalty phase and had the prosecutors write up an order sentencing Chris to death ex parte in secret without talking to the defense. So, you know, that's not terribly fair either. Well, that's how we got the death penalty thrown out, was they'd sentenced him to death before they heard the evidence. But, and we retried the case and we beat the death penalty on retrial. But, you know, at the resentencing trial, we weren't allowed to say that Chris didn't do it because that's illegal, because he had already been convicted. And the judge told me that if I uttered the word innocent in the resentencing trial, I would go to prison. So Peter Bottomley, Sir Peter Bottomley to us these days, was testifying by satellite from London about his friend Chris Maharaj. And so I asked him, you know, why are you testifying? Thinking he was going to say, because my friend Chris is a fine, upstanding character and I'm here for him. Instead, he says, because this is a monumental miscarriage of justice. Whereupon the judge sends the jury out and tells me I'm going to prison if he does that again. Because you're not allowed to talk about someone's innocence at a thing where you're deciding whether he should live or die. Totally insane. Now, I'm going to ask an American. Who's the American volunteer? Yeah, you put your hand halfway up. There's another American rule of law, Herrera versus Collins, that says that whether you're innocent or not is not legally relevant under the US Constitution to whether you should spend the rest of your life in prison or get the death penalty, right? You follow what I say? Would you please explain that to the assembled people here with that microphone? How is that? How can that be the law?
I feel like I should be quoting Scalia now. I think...
Scalia? No, you should disown the bastard.
No, completely. No, but I think the argument that he made was that it's actually about due process of law and not about whether you're actually innocent or guilty. And so if you've actually gone through the trial system, then that's actually what the justice is. Whether or not you're innocent or not is irrelevant to that.
You know, she's
which is
quite
crazy.
right. This is the first time I've ever asked someone in the audience, and they've given such a succinct. Yeah, well done. Now, my second question is that sane or is that fucking insane? Right, pardon my French. But, you know, his argument, which is the law in America, is you have a right to a fair trial, not the right to a trial that comes to the right result. That's crazy, right? And his argument is based on the fact that if you go to the US Constitution and you look through the Bill of Rights, nowhere does it say, thou shalt not execute an innocent person. And so that's the law. They're crazy. In Chris's case, the federal court held, first time around, that it was all very interesting, this stuff about innocence that we'd presented, but it's not legally relevant. And so Chris was to spend the rest of his life in prison. And, you know, we got him off death row, but he's facing parole when he's 101 years old, right? So that was 1997. Since then, we went through every court in the world and we lost, and the poor guy's there. And his wife, who's 75 years old today too, who's stood by him all of these years, and she just goes to see him once a week in prison, and they've stuck together. It's an amazing story. And she is a true saint. And I felt really, really guilty all along. So we had to, follow up and try to figure out who really did it, which is very, very difficult. Because, innocent people are a pain in the ass. As clients, I hate representing innocent people because there are two things. One is you go to them, okay, let me ask you, sir. Did you commit the murder in the DuPont Plaza Hotel on October the 16th, 1986?
I did not.
You didn't. What were you doing that day?
I was out for dinner with my wife in the evening.
You lying bastard. And your wife is not going to support you. You probably weren't even married. Anyway, no, look, the bottom line is if you were being slightly more honest, you would say you don't know, right? Now, the problem is not just that you know nothing, so you can't help me. The other problem is this. On average, it takes me 3 years from arrest to trial, right, to get prepared for a death penalty trial. And, I'm going to tell you that to do my job properly, I want you to wait for 3 years in prison. You can't get bail on a capital case. How do you feel about that?
Not good.
Not great, right? And you say, get on with it. I'm innocent. It's not a question of whether there's a doubt about my innocence. I'm 100% sure I'm innocent because I didn't do it. So what are you wasting your time for, lawyer? And then this is the next thing. You got this chap, Charlie, next to you, who says, I've done 7 capital cases, won them all. I'll do it for you for 20 grand. And I come along and I say, look, these things are really complicated and tough, and they're very expensive. By the way, this is not true. I've never been paid for a case in my life. But I would say to you, $2 million. You're a businessman, and you're sitting there. Who are you going to hire?
Who am I going to hire?
Yeah. He'll do it for 20 grand. I'll do it for 2 million.
You're the lawyer.
He's a lawyer too. He's now a judge, actually, horrifyingly enough.
Am I going to do it on the basis of reassuringly expensive?
No, you're sitting there as someone who's 100% sure you're innocent. You think it's all bullshit. And, this can all be done very easily, and I want all this money. So you think I'm a typical American lawyer. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, which way would you go?
I haven't decided, but I don't know.
Sure. No, what's interesting, Chris was a tough business person who was a millionaire here in Britain, who, I didn't know this at the time I took his case on, but before my dad bankrupted the stud I grew up in Newmarket, when my family was still nouveau riche, and before we became nouveau pauvre again, Chris bought 2 horses from my father. He was incredibly rich. He was a really good businessman. And, he's faced with this lawyer who comes and says, I'll do it for 20 grand, and all these other people who say they won't. It'll cost a lot more than that. He goes with the cheap guy, Charlie, because it's easy. I'm innocent. Why do I need to spend all that money? And, every decision innocent people make tends to be catastrophically unwise. And not because they're stupid. Chris is not stupid. He's a very bright guy. But, he knows he didn't do it. So he thinks it's a ridiculous business decision to spend all of that money on something that's so simple. And it goes all the way through. When the lawyer said, I don't think we need to call these alibi witnesses, Chris said, oh, fine, no big deal. I'm innocent. No one's going to convict me. And the lawyer says, I don't think we need to call you as a witness. Fine, no big deal. I'm innocent. When the jury convicted him, one of the there are many telling reasons why I'm absolutely certain beyond any sensible doubt he's innocent, but one of the telling things, jury comes back, says guilty, he fainted. He passed out. And, you know, you really can't fake that sort of thing. But at any rate, let's leap forward now to 2012. And Chris is still in prison. He's still facing life in prison. He's not going to get out until he's 101 and all of that. He's just been in hospital because he got flesh-eating bacteria and he almost died. Poor guy's in a wheelchair. So I'm feeling really guilty. And, you know, we know the Colombians have something to do with it. So at this point, I got some help from someone and I popped down to Medellin, which was really interesting, actually. It was slightly terrifying, I will say. But I was staying with some people who were head of the Medellin cartel, which made life a lot easier. I've represented a few of these guys over the years, and so you're much better off, let me tell you, if you're going to Medellin, to stay with the head of the cartel than you are with other people. And so we gradually I talked to all of these people about who did the murders. And they told me, they said, I can't believe the Americans put Chris Maharaj, whoever that is, on death row for this. That was one of ours. And they explained to me that the Mu Youngs had been stealing money from them, and we'd divined that from their records, that actually they were skimming money from Pablo Escobar. And while it might possibly be a motive for murder that Chris and them had a big debate in public, it's a slightly stronger motive that they were skimming money from Pablo Escobar, who reputedly was responsible for 3,000 murders. Anyway, and these guys down in Colombia tell me, actually, you know, the guy who did it is a fellow called Cuchilla, whose nickname means the blade. He's an interesting guy, Cuchilla, because he had two nicknames. The other is Pasarela, which means catwalk, because he had a little bisexual thing going on. But when he was not walking along the catwalk, he was murdering people. And so he was the one who did it. And I got to meet all these fascinating people in Medellin. And one of them was saying how what happened when Pablo Escobar, when they were trying to kill Pablo in 1993, was they kidnapped Cuchilla to try and find out where Pablo was, because Cuchilla was Pablo's big hitman. And so they tortured this poor chap, and he wouldn't say where Pablo was because he actually didn't know. And so then they get to the end of torturing Cuchilla, and they say, well, now it is your time to die. How would you like to die? And Cuchilla, who had murdered a lot of people himself, said, really, I get to choose how to die? He was very surprised. And the guy said, no, I was just joking. And then, horrifyingly enough, this is what really happened, then they fed him through a wood chipping machine. Now, I don't know if you've seen the movie Fargo, but in Fargo, the guy was dead when they fed him through the wood chipping machine. This guy, when he began going through the wood chipping machine, was not dead, but he was at the end. This is the guy who actually did the murder, and we then get Pablo's senior lieutenant to give us a statement saying that Cuchilla was the one who did it. Yeah, me and Pablo talked about it. Yeah. And then we line up these other guys. Jaime Vallejos Mejia, the guy who was in room 1214 across the hall from the murder scene, turns out to still be in the cartels. And we had someone go to see him because I thought he might like to sign an affidavit for us saying that he was involved in money laundering. Really, you know, you can get them to do it. You really can. There are great ways to get people. Catholicism is a very good thing. Because I speak as someone who is half Jewish myself, and this guilt stuff is a really, really positive aspect of religion. And so I've had people confess in the past. You know, we work it out so they confess to their priest, and then their priest testifies without revealing their name and all that good stuff. But in this case, I thought Jaime might like to sign an affidavit about money laundering because the statute of limitations is run. And I didn't expect him to say he was involved in the murder, but he could sure help us out if he'd just help us out with that. So what does Jaime do? He kidnaps the person who's helping me, holds this person for 3 days, puts a sack over her head, takes her to a place where there are 4 guys in the room with guns, then admits to her that indeed they were involved and it was a cartel hit, but declines to sign my affidavit, which I thought was really rude. But, you know, this is what's going on. This poor person did it all voluntarily and spent 3 days being kidnapped by that, and it didn't have any impact on the prosecutors. So then we get another guy who is in witness protection, who testifies that just last week, who comes into court and testifies that I was in Colombia. I was a pilot, and I was called the FedEx of cocaine. And I met Pablo for the first time at Christmas 1986, which was just a month and a half after the Mu Youngs were murdered. And Pablo was telling me what I should and shouldn't do. And Pablo says, you don't lie about me, because if you do, I clipped Little Bird's wings, which is his euphemism for murdering a guy called Barry Seal, who was a CIA agent. And then he said, and you don't steal from me, because that's why I offed the Mu Youngs in the DuPont Plaza Hotel in downtown Miami. So this guy is testifying about Pablo saying he did the murder that Chris Maharaj is in prison for. And we asked the prosecutors, can we please present this guy under the name John Brown? Because we can't use his real name, because he'll be murdered if we do. They fight us tooth and nail to try to not have that public. And the judge is a decent guy, so the judge says you can testify under the pseudonym, no cameras in the court, no looking at the face, no publishing his face in the media. So what does the Miami Herald do? The next day they run an article guessing who this guy is and naming him in the newspaper after he's put his life on the line to try to get Chris Maharaj out of prison for a crime he didn't do. And then we go on and on. We have this lovely guy called Baruch Vega, who is working for the government in 1986. And he said, oh, they told me they did that murder. They told me right after it happened. I told the police, and it's all in their files somewhere. And it just goes on and on like that. And then we called a cop last week who comes forward and says, oh yeah, we had a little deal with the cartels, that when the cartels wanted to off someone, they'd tell us. And, our motto is to serve and protect. And, we'd just serve and protect the cartels, not the other people. And so when they wanted to kill someone, we would have a police officer present at the scene to make sure they didn't get in trouble. And he gives me a list of 18 homicides that the Miami Police Department, were behind, who were working with the cartels on, including Chris Maharaj. And he says his buddy Pete Romero told him we're going to hook him up, which is a quaint little euphemism for framing someone, right? So we present all of that. And by the way, I popped by Washington to meet with the head of the FBI Civil Rights Division to see if they wouldn't like to investigate the 18 homicides that the police department did. And, I met with the head of their division, and he's a nice chap, and I gave him a memo on it all. And I asked him if they'd follow up. And I did that with him almost 2 years ago now. He never replied. This is all the stuff we were putting on last week in court in Miami. And how many of you are going to vote guilty now? Put your hand up. This is the deal, right? I mean, this whole thing is a remarkably bizarre story, a bit like the little child in the freezer. These things happen all the time. And if they happen, the probability that we're going to screw over the person who's arrested is immense because of simple aspects of logic, right? So something extraordinary like the child in the freezer happens. Now, you didn't kill the child, ma'am, and I'm your lawyer, and I say, look, the state's really nice. They're not going to execute you. They're offering you life in prison if you plead guilty. What do you say? Well, I hope not. You didn't do it, for Christ's sake. Now, if, on the other hand, you committed 27 homicides and you're really guilty, and I come to you with this deal, it's not a great deal, you've got to spend the rest of your life in prison, you might take the deal, right? But if you're innocent, you'll never take the deal. Almost never. Every now and then it happens. So then you go to trial, right? And then the prosecution puts on all these witnesses saying this child was obviously, horribly killed or whatever. You take the witness stand, right? Or you listen to my advice and you don't take the witness stand. And I ask you, how did the child die? What do you say? No idea. Well, you're useless, aren't you? And so that doesn't rebut the prosecution's case. Or otherwise what you do is what another of my guys did with the shaken baby case, where he says, I tell you what I think happened is I think the child fell off the bed and hit her head. But I wasn't in there, so I can't tell you for sure. Then 5 doctors come in and say that's physically impossible. So then the jury's looking at you saying, you're lying. So not only do they hate you and convict you, but they think you're a hypocrite, so they sentence you to death. And the problem with extraordinary cases is you never plead guilty, almost. You go to trial, you often don't have any idea what happened because you actually didn't do it. prosecution puts on their case, you let your idiot lawyer put on no case, and you get convicted, and it happens all the time. And of the many, many people I've represented over the years, the number of folk who ended up on the wrong end of some bizarre happenstance is extraordinary. So the 1 in a million chance that originally happened actually becomes like 1 in 5 by the time you get to trial, that you're going to get done for it. And no one recognizes the process. And then you face all these other rules where, for the succinct reasons that Madam in the back there explained, whether you're innocent or not is not legally relevant. You don't have the right to a lawyer. I've represented Chris for 21 years, and he has no right, no money, he has no right to funds, when they've never paid for anything. The whole process is stacked to basically do people over. And this is why the doors are locked, and you have to swear that you're going to help us out for the rest of your lives. Because there's an awful lot of this stuff going on, and we haven't even touched terrorism. That's really all I want to say. Except I've got to write 3 or 4 more chapters about Chris, and we'll win his case. We'll win his case before Christmas. But you know what's going to happen? The judge is going to order a new trial, and the judge is going to say he has a right to a new trial because he can't declare him innocent, because that doesn't happen. Although we're arguing that he should, but I very much doubt he will. And then you know what will happen is the state will appeal. The state will appeal through the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court of Florida, maybe the US Supreme Court. That'll take 3 years. By then, Chris will be 78. Then we come back for a retrial, which, God, I'm looking forward to. It'll be so much fun. And, they'll string that along for ages, trying to depose everybody and all the rest of that nonsense. We won't go to a retrial until Chris is 80 years old. He'll be dead. And these are the problems that you face when you're trying to deal with justice. Now, we can avoid that, because when the judge comes back and orders a retrial, I hope to goodness, then I want you all to get on a plane to Miami and go picket the state's attorney's office and start doing terrible things. I don't care what you do. You can blow up, well, whatever. No violence, no physical violence, but just really humiliating and embarrassing things, right? I mean, I do love, whatever ideas, I'd love to hear your ideas. I'll tell you some of the ones. It's so much fun embarrassing politicians. I'll just tell you one little story just for fun. Because you've got to think about how to really make life very, very embarrassing for them. So I was representing this kid who was facing the death penalty a while back. And I really didn't do this intentionally. I tried to take credit for it, but it's not true. It was pure accident. I'd got Amnesty International to do an urgent action saying you shouldn't kill kids. And so they were deluging the prosecutor's office with letters saying, you're barbarians, you shouldn't do this. Totally coincidentally, that was when the anthrax crisis struck America. And some crazy guy was sending letters with anthrax in it to various people. And so everyone was paranoid about their post. And they thought they were all going to be killed with anthrax. And here it was, this prosecutor was getting 10,000 letters from these amnesty people who he thought were zealot, commie, pinko, liberal lunatics. And he didn't dare open any of his posts because he thought it was anthrax. So he calls me up saying, can you please stop these people? We'll drop the death penalty today if you stop these people. So that's how we won that case. And that was utterly unintentional. I pretended it wasn't, but it was absolutely unintentional on my part. So we just need ways to persuade the prosecutor that she should do the right thing. So if you can come up with a genius idea, I'd be very grateful. In the meantime, enough from me. How about you? Yes, ma'am.
I liked your comment. I liked your comment about the weird things happening. Weird things do happen. I wrote a book called The Marilyn Scandal, about Marilyn Monroe's suicide or murder. But I'm very interested in Amanda Knox, because she's an American girl over in Italy who has been accused of a rather ruthless murder.
Of course, everyone knows about her. Can I tell you a story about her?
Well, can I just finish
Sure,
my
please
comment?
do.
You are an American because you like to talk.
I do, I'm
Monopolize the conversation.
That's unbelievable.
Anyway, I'm curious to know what you think the scenario of the Amanda Knox thing is, and whether you think she has any chance of getting off, and whether you think she was either hypnotized, brainwashed, or whether she too was sleepwalking.
Well, look, I think the case against her is unbelievably thin, and I would acquit her in a heartbeat. Because, look, I don't know what happened, I wasn't there, but the evidence against her is immensely weak. And it's what we talk about a reasonable doubt. And, when you think about that, or even O.J. Simpson, maybe O.J. did it, but
This girl is a young American girl.
I know she is.
She could spend her whole life in prison for something she never did.
That might well be true, and this happens every day. And you know, shaken baby syndrome, do I have any doctors in the house? Bastards. Look, there you go, you're a doctor. Okay, well, you're a sensible doctor, because I know who you are. You know, it's fascinating to me, shaken baby syndrome. It is total, unadulterated bullshit. It just doesn't happen. Physiologically, it's nonsense. But you know, the case I was just mentioned briefly before, this is just to illustrate this whole issue, because it's sort of what was happening there. And you remember also, who was that woman who was convicted in Massachusetts? Sorry? Who was it?
I was thinking of a British one.
No, it was a British woman.
Louise
Woodward. Yeah. You know, this shaken baby stuff is such bullshit, and we do it all the time, right? But with Brian Kohlberg's case, for example, he had said that he wasn't in the room, but he heard the child falling off the bed, and the child would have fallen, her head would have gone 5.5 feet, like that, right, onto a hardwood floor. How many people here think it's possible that a child can die from that fall? Or perhaps how many people think it's not possible, it's impossible for a child to die from that fall? You know, the medical profession says that that's impossible. We had 3 brain surgeons come into court to say an infant cannot die from a fall of less than 3 stories. These people are absolutely insane. You know, and you know what I did? I was cross-examining them, and you know, in my misspent youth, I did physics, chemistry, mathematics, all that bullshit. And you know, really, really simple physics says that if you do that, your head would hit the ground at about 15 miles an hour. Now, what's the fastest you can sprint, madam? 4 miles an hour. Do I have any advance on 4 miles an hour? You, sir. Come on, the fastest you can sprint. Really dash across here.
10, 12 miles an hour.
12 miles an hour. Do I have any advance on 12 miles an hour? Athletic-looking people. You, sir. What do you reckon? No, you. You. What do you reckon? 15 miles an hour. Any advance on 15 miles an hour? You, sir. You're a fit-looking chap. You can beat 15? You don't think you can? Do you know Usain Bolt, during the 100-meter dash, does 21 miles an hour? I don't believe you, frankly. 15 miles an hour is faster than any of us in this room can do. And I invited each of these doctors to sprint into the brick wall and see what happened to them. And they wouldn't do it. You know, and yet that's the law. That is the fact in American medicine, is that you can't sustain a fatal head injury from that. It's total nonsense. Now, I could bore you with the details as to why they believe that. And I'm a bit obsessed with it, and I've written 90,000 words on it if you'd like to waste your time. But we do the same thing here in Britain, and there are these Flat Earth Society ideas that enter the law, enter medicine, enter all of our professions. I'm always intrigued by those. And they then enter the courtroom, and I say, I'm a brain surgeon, and I say, well, you know, it's all very interesting what you say, but I'm a brain surgeon. And then the jury convicts. And there's so many of these things. And you know, the same's true of the bullshit DNA in the Kirch case. And you know, who thinks DNA, forensic DNA, is absolute science? You know, it's really interesting. There was a thing I was reading. My wife is doing a miscarriage of justice case here in Britain right now. And she was showing me the DNA results. And the expert comes in and says the probability of a false match of this DNA is a little over 1 in a billion. But do you know what? The probability the moron who did the testing makes a mistake is a whole lot higher. I mean, we did a study in Mississippi, and they made a mistake in 20% of the cases they did. And I know for a fact they got it wrong in a bunch of my cases, because I know my guy did it, and their DNA said he didn't. But you know, the problem with all of this statistical stuff is it just is nonsense. And we try these people by science, which is just not science. I mean, my favorite is forensic hair analysis, which I won't bore you with.
It wouldn't affect me, Clive.
Anyway,
some questions. We've got about 10 minutes or so. At the back.
Clive, I'm going to...
This is the spineless bastard who wouldn't vote guilty or not guilty. The wise person.
Thank you. I'm going to guess you get a lot of people coming to you, lifers and death row prisoners, who say they didn't do it. I'm going to also guess that that's probably not true in all cases. How do you work out the innocent from the guilty?
I don't care. I hate representing innocent people because, look, the whodunit bit's not really very interesting, is it? I mean, you know, it's just what they make the TV movies about. What's interesting is this. What's the most despicable thing you've ever done in your entire life that you don't want to tell these people about? And my advice to you is that you don't answer.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Take that advice.
Very good. You know, what's interesting is we've all, and me too, and I'm not going to tell you frankly, we've all done things that we would rather you didn't know. And, you know, the question, of course, is why we did it. And, you know, we've all got a reason at some level. Now, I'm not saying that all of you have committed murder. Some of you have voted Conservative, which I view as vastly worse. No, I'm only joking. But look, I was saying it to he ran as a goddamn Conservative. You know, I said that once in an audience where my mother was there, and she's voted Tory since 1632, and she was quite annoyed at me, and so I started saying Republican after that. No, look, we've all done bad things, and what's interesting to me is why we do them, and there's always a reason. And I'll give you an example. I worked on a case years ago in Florida where a guy, it was an awful crime. And he killed this woman and done horrible things with a Coke bottle. And we start looking into his background, and it turns out that when he was 12 years old, he goes hunting with his dad and his dad's friends, and he's taking a pee against a tree, and his dad's friends start teasing him about the size of his penis. Well, he was 12 years old, but he goes back to mum and he's weeping and, you know, whatever. And it's America and they don't have a health service and frankly they don't need it in that case. But his mum says, I know how to solve it, and takes him to the vet. And the vet injects him with testosterone as one might a bull for the next year. And at the end of that year, he becomes a prison guard, by the way, and then commits this terrible offense and they sentence him to death. And you know, there's always something. There's always, the worse the crime, the easier the understanding. Now, it doesn't mean that, you know, that it's my role to forgive anyone. It's my role to try to understand them and to then present that human being to people, because we are all better than our worst 15 minutes. Dare I say it, even myself. And that's what's interesting to me. So I don't really care. I don't like representing innocent people because I don't think it's very interesting. But on the other hand, you know, it comes along and one has to deal with it, and that's a nightmare. And it comes along way more than I would like to think was true. And we did a series of death penalty cases in my office, the charity I ran in New Orleans, and we did 171 capital cases over a 3-year period. And we would investigate them from the moment it all happened and then just give the evidence to the prosecutors. We were able to convince them they'd arrested the wrong person in 126 cases, 74.9% of the cases. Now, if you're a Conservative member of the Tory party, the story there is 74.9% of the people who committed the crime are still out there. If you're a softy, commie, pinko liberal like me, it's all about how the whole system is totally broken. Or maybe that's the Conservative story also. So there's a lot of it, sorry.
More questions? Yeah, one at the back there, please. And then we'll take another one as well, Clive. We'll get a couple.
Sure.
Please.
Hello.
Can you tell us your name, actually, where you're from as well? That will help. Thanks.
I was hoping not to say that. My name's Philip. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
At the risk of being lynched, part of my background is as a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor at a time when here in the UK Parliament was debating whether or not to bring back the death penalty. And I stressed about whether I should remain a prosecutor and try to retain integrity within the system, or whether I should leave a system that I thought adopted a process that I couldn't agree with. What advice would you have given me?
Okay, that's one. And at the back?
I have a question about miscarriages of justice in the UK. I worked for a time as a criminal defence barrister here, and with the cuts on legal aid in the system going on under the Tory coalition, there are increasing numbers of miscarriages of justice cases and fewer resources and fewer people around to campaign in the way that people did in the 1980s and 70s. And I'd like you to say a little bit about that. I'm actually currently working on a miscarriage of justice case of 2 young black guys accused of murder in Hackney. But I think that what's really awful is that it's all going under the radar, and there aren't the campaigners and the workers, the researchers and the resources to challenge what's happening, and the police are getting away with the most appalling practices, along with the Crown Prosecution Service in this country. And I keep hearing people say, well, Britain has a great system of justice. Well, actually it doesn't. And if you're black and male in this country, you're more likely to be convicted and more likely to have a long sentence. And I could go on with statistics forever, but I'd like you to say a little bit about that.
Let me first take this, because I have a problem with the precept, actually. I totally appreciate where you're coming from. I think the death penalty is just insane. I've watched 6 people die, and let's face it, it doesn't make the world a better place. But actually, that's not the issue. The issue is this. Briefly, what's the worst crime, what's the worst thing you've ever done? Just think in your mind, and everyone think in your mind, right? Think in your mind what the worst thing we've all done. I'm now going to tell you what his is, right? And I'm about 90% sure this is true. It was something you did to someone you love that you really, really feel bad about. And, it's true of me too. And we feel dreadful about it. It really either hurt that person or that person didn't find out about it, thank God. And it's not a criminal offense. Am I right?
No, I'm not saying anything.
Very wise. Here's a trained lawyer. I think that's true for most of us, right? It's interesting that most of the things that we're most ashamed of that really hurt someone else probably aren't a crime, right? Then you think about the second thing, which is, what's the worst criminal offense? And you don't have to answer this if it's embarrassing, but what's the worst criminal offense that you've been a victim of, right? Are you willing to tell us that? Burglary. Total bullshit. Didn't help you. It didn't hurt you. Had insurance. It was nothing, right? Now, what's so interesting to me is that the burglar would go to prison for that. And in America, and God forbid in Alabama, the second, they don't even know 3 strikes and you're out. They don't know baseball. 2 strikes, life without parole, right? So that's what we do for burglary. Now, for what you did and what I did, not even a crime. And yet we all agree, I think, that what you and I did caused far more harm than the burglary did to you. Why is that? Why is it that we send certain people to prison for something that causes way less harm than what we do all the time? So my problem with your question is not the death penalty. My problem is the prison and the legal system generally. And I think the legal system in Britain, as it is in America, has serious, serious fundamental problems. Now, it's a long conversation we'll have to take to the pub.
So
with that, look, there's no problem. We've got lots of people in this room who are now not allowed to leave until they swear that they're going to help us on this injustice stuff. And what the thing that's total nonsense about this contrarian stuff, not a sacrifice. I don't understand how people get up in the morning and go to do a job that's unbelievably boring and that is not fulfilling. Whereas I get up in the morning, I think, why on earth do we only have 24 hours in the day? And why don't we have on our desk, thank God it's Monday instead of thank God it's Friday? Because I love what I do, and it's not a sacrifice, that's total bullshit. And what we need to do is educate people that actually they can create jobs that are so much fun, as well as doing some good for some people who really need some help. And then, I don't care what the government does, they're pathetic. They are so afraid of everything because, they want to get re-elected. And we don't. So that gives us immense power over them. And what I found fascinating, for example, just about Guantanamo Bay, the most powerful guy in the world wanted to screw those people over, and we thought, no, that's not good. So we sued him, and he's lost and lost and lost, Bush did. And, we got most of those people out of there. It's not hard. It's really quite fun. So I don't think it's gloom and doom. It's just all these bastards in here need to swear in blood that they're going to do it forever, and then we'll be okay.
We're running short of time. I just want to take a couple of statements and probably just one question. Do you have a question at the back?
I do. Quickly.
Okay, very quick, please. Yeah, thanks.
Easy one.
I can probably speak loud anyway.
Go
You mentioned earlier about how wonderful it would be if, with Chris Maharaj, we all got on planes and did something ridiculous outside the courthouse or whatever. And I just wondered if you've got any splendidly inspirational examples of where action by normal members of the public in whatever form has actually made a difference.
And just one more quickly over here. And I think that'll be it.
I think what you say about getting up in the day and having fun. What you say about getting up in the morning and having fun, that rocks. I think for a lot of us, and I think also what Ali is getting at is, we feel we don't know how. And that's what makes us feel powerless and hopeless, and also then guiltily turn our face away. So I wonder, could you in like not more than 10 words tell us how?
Those two things.
10 words, that's easy, no problem. Look, two things. One is, I have a little rant I like to give about that, which is quite a long one. But it's really simpler than you think. And, you know, we live in fear. We live in fear of, you know, being homeless and all the rest of it. And those of us here, almost certainly all of us almost, are way too privileged for that to happen. Where it's just we expect ridiculous things that we don't need. I mean, I have a Nissan Micra, which is a fantastic car, and I'm very proud of it. And why anyone would want anything better than that is beyond me. And we just build up all these absurd expectations that we don't need to do. And it's a more complicated thing, but it's very easy to set up a job that's all about just helping other people. It's not hard. We'll talk about it in the pub. But, you know, the other thing is how to embarrass people. Yeah, the people who need embarrassing. I'll tell you a couple of little stories.
Very quick, Clive.
Yeah, quickly, sorry. Right now, the last British resident in Guantanamo Bay is Shakarama. Some woman with the Save Shaka campaign, with no prompting from me, bought a 12-foot-high inflatable shaka that she's going around blowing up in Parliament and outside Parliament, and she's getting celebrities to have their pictures taken with the inflatable shaka, and she's just embarrassing the British government for doing nothing for shaka, and that's really good and powerful, and it's one person who's going around with this inflatable doll. Which is great. But there are other things. I mean, I had a case, they've threatened me with prison many times. It's much more intimidating going to Guantanamo Bay, for example, than going to Colombia. And one time I was down there, and this is just what we lefties need to do. We take ourselves way too seriously. And it's not persuasive. And what you want to do when you're trying to get the bad guys to do the right thing is you want to embarrass them. And laugh at them, because if you just tell them they're wicked, they don't care, because you're a commie, and that fulfills their sense of self. But if you make people laugh, then they think, oh shit, that's embarrassing. So I got a letter one time threatening me with 40 years in prison for smuggling Under Armour underpants and Speedo swimming trunks into Shakarama, coincidentally. And I get this letter, and I think, oh God, is it April Fool's Day? No, it's not. And they're threatening to put me in prison. And so I write them a letter saying, look, free legal advice. I agree with you, Speedo swimming trunks should be a criminal offense. But actually, the only place Shaka can swim is in his toilet, in the cell, in his prison cell in Guantanamo. So if you put a little sign above the toilet that says, we don't piss in your swimming pool, so please don't swim in our toilet, that should solve the problem. And it went on in that vein for a couple of pages, and then I wanted to email it to the Pentagon. My wife had done what she always does when I'm annoyed at the American government, which she'd unplugged the internet so I wouldn't do something. And so that's just to protect me from getting held in contempt yet again. So anyway, I read it the next morning. I thought it was pretty funny. So I sent it anyhow and copied it to the New York Times and the Washington Post, who published it verbatim. And then Joe Corey, who runs Agent Provocateur, because obviously Guantanamo was short on underwear, came up with a set of orange underwear that had little shackles on the front and said, fair trial my ass across the back. And they were really slinky underwear. And we then sent some to Donald Rumsfeld. I took some to Guantanamo Bay, and we just humiliated them some more. And it was great fun. And it finally began to get the message across about what psychotic lunatics these people are who run that prison in Guantanamo Bay. I've been to 32 times now. And so, look, what you got to do is just come up with something witty that makes them look silly. And that's the best I can say. It's great fun. So come up with some ideas and then do it.
Well, I just wanted to say that when the judges actually deliberated, and the actual nominations closed at the end of the year, and at the beginning of this year, the judges came together and were deliberating for hours and hours, because we had scores of nominations for the prize this year. And the prize itself is a stunning piece of sculpture, which is generously donated by Mauro Perichetti, who's a world-famous pop art sculptor, and his pieces go for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's a big burden on us to get the right person, and I think, Clive, after tonight's lecture, I think you've absolutely vindicated our decision. Thank you for that. And I must end by saying that my first car was a Nissan Micra. Thanks, please.
Stick with it. Thank you, Clive.